Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Teresa Warner, and I'm the 105th president of the National Press Club. We are the world's leading professional organization for journalists, committed to our profession's future through programming with events such as this, while fostering a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at www.press.org. To donate to our programs offered to the public through our National Press Club Journalism Institute, please visit www.press.org/institute. On behalf of our members worldwide, I'd like to welcome our speaker and those of you attending today's events. Our head table includes guests of our speaker as well as working journalists who are club members. And if you hear applause in our audience, we'd like to note that members of the general public are attending, so it's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and our public radio audience. Our luncheons are also featured in our members-produced weekly podcast from the National Press Club, available on iTunes. You can also follow the action on Twitter using the hashtag NPC Lunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have a Q&A, and I will ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table guest, and I'd ask each of you here to stand up briefly as your name is announced. From your right, Jeff Plunges, Bloomberg. Jennifer Babbage, Washington Bureau Chief, Time Warner Cable. Julio Aliga, WZDC Telemundo. Dave Nicholson, TSA Acting Chief of Staff. Michael Bolden, Washington Post. Gail Rosides, TSA Deputy Administrator. Allison Fitzgerald, freelance journalist and Speaker Committee Chair. I'm going to skip our speaker for a moment. Andrea Stone, Huffington Post and Speaker Committee member who organized today's event. Chris McLaughlin, TSA Assistant Administrator, Office of Security Operations. Jeff Ballou, Al Jazeera. Rachel Oswald, Global Security Newswire. Nathan Hurst, CQ Roll Call. As the New York Times noted, soon after he became the 5th head of Transportation Security Administration in July of 2010, John Pistole is the unwitting face of everything Americans hate about airport security in a post-9/11 world. Every time we are asked to take off our shoes at the airport, pull out our laptops, or submit to an uncomfortable pat-down, we have his agency to blame. But Pistole, who spent most of his career chasing the bad guys at the FBI, can take it. As he told the Times, "My hope is that whatever people want to call me, they recognize that we're simply doing everything we can to work with people to provide the best possible security." The son of a Church of God minister, Pistole graduated from Anderson University in Indiana and Indiana University Law School in Indianapolis. He joined the FBI in 1983 in Minneapolis. He went on to work in New York before moving to the Bureau's headquarters in Washington to supervise its organized crime section. Since 1999, when he helped lead the inquiry into crash of Egypt Air Flight 990 off of Nantucket, Massachusetts, he has worked on some of the nation's highest profile cases involving national security. After the 9/11 attacks, he was put in charge of the FBI's expanded Counterterrorism branch, eventually becoming the Bureau's Executive Assistant Director of Counterterrorism and Counterintelligence. Pistole led or was involved in a number of high-profile investigations, including the 2003 suicide bombings in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, the breakup of a plot to bomb New York City subways in 2009, and later that year, the case of the would-be underwear bomber on the Detroit-bound jet on Christmas Day. He also took part in the investigation of an attempted car bombing in Times Square in 2010. In 2004, Pistole was named Deputy Director of the FBI and was serving in the No. 2 position when President Obama tapped him to fill the top spot of the TSA. Today, he oversees 60,000 employees who provide security at more than 450 airports and through the Federal Air Marshal Service. His agency is also responsible for the security of the nation's highways, railroads, ports, mass transit systems, and pipelines. Since taking over the agency nearly a decade after the 9/11 attacks, Pistole has worked to evolve the TSA's one-size-fits-all screening of nearly 1.8 million people a day into a more intelligence-driven based on risk. Along the way, he has had to answer to angry travelers about pat-downs, chat-downs, and naked body scans. I'm sure the administrator will have much to say about all this, so please welcome our luncheon guest, John Pistole.
Well, thank you, Teresa, for most of that introduction anyway. That was, I've been described in a lot of different ways, and that was a kind of a compendium of a lot of things that coming together there. Well, good afternoon. It is an honor to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and to speak on the continuing evolution of the Transportation Security Administration, our place in the global counterterrorism community, and our latest efforts to strengthen aviation security through the ongoing development and implementation of risk-based, intelligence-driven security initiatives. Now, of course, last fall, we marked the 10th anniversary of both the 9/11 attacks and the legislation known as ATSA, ATSA, the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, passed by the United States Congress on November 19th of 2001, signed by the President several days later. Those both as an important part of our country's response to those horrific attacks. So TSA was created through that legislation, and we continue to be proud of how TSA was staffed and operational in less than 1 year. In fact, many Americans, I would say most Americans, don't know that the building of TSA required the largest, most complex mobilization of the federal workforce since World War II. As TSA administrator, I've been privileged to know and work with a number of dedicated individuals who know our agency's story better than anyone because they helped write it. Dedicated public servants like then Transportation Secretary Norm Mineta, Deputy Secretary Michael Jackson, who later became the Deputy Secretary at the newly created Department of Homeland Security, John McGaugh, the first administrator of TSA, and Ralph Basham, who worked closely with him, and then administrators Jim Loy, who came over from the Coast Guard and then went on to DHS, David Stone, and then Kip Hawley, the next three administrators. And also on that list is our current Deputy Administrator, Gail Recides, who is seated here, who is also there at the start. And as just one of a handful of public servants, given the urgent task of standing up a new security agency whose sweeping mission has always been to protect our nation's transportation systems to ensure the freedom of movement for people and commerce. I'd also note that Gail served for 18 months as the acting administrator before my arrival, and the American people are more secure because of her outstanding service. So at its core, the concept of risk-based security demonstrates a progression of work TSA has been doing throughout its first decade of service to the American people. It's an understanding, really an acknowledgement, that we are not in the business of eliminating all risk associated with traveling from point A to point B. Risk is inherent in virtually everything we do. Our objective is to mitigate risk, to reduce it as much as possible, and to ensure that the potential for anyone to commit a deliberate act against our transportation system is mitigated. Before I go further, I want to take just a moment and mention another significant anniversary within the TSA family. Teresa mentioned the Federal Air Marshal Service. Well, last Friday, on March 2nd, the men and women of the Federal Air Marshals Service who today comprise TSA's primary law enforcement component, celebrated their 50th anniversary. Originally safety inspectors for the U.S. Customs Agency, the first class of 18 peace officers, as they were called, was sworn in 50 years ago and began building the legacy of protection which today's officers uphold every time they board an aircraft. While their core mission to protect the flying public has remained constant over the years, Federal Air Marshals today have an ever-expanding role in Homeland Security, and they work closely with other law enforcement agencies to accomplish their mission. Air Marshals today are integrated with key counterterrorism partners such as the National Counterterrorism Center, the National Targeting Center, and on many of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Forces around the country. They're also a critical part of the effective partnerships that are essential to nearly everything that we do in TSA. So to help set the stage for the emergence of the risk-based, intelligence-driven transportation security system we are building at TSA, I think it's helpful to take a brief look back and recall what transportation security looked like prior to the September 11th attacks. Because, as you are aware, what was in place then bears little resemblance to the strong, multi-layered system in place today. And that's especially true when we talk specifically about aviation security. So remember that before September 11th, there was one, no cohesive system in place to check passenger names against terrorist watch lists in advance of flying. Two, only limited technologies in place for uncovering a wide array of threats to passengers and aircraft, and we saw how effective those were or were not on September 11th. Three, no comprehensive federal requirements to screen, check, or carry on baggage. Four, minimal in-flight security on most flights. And five, from an intelligence coordination standpoint, before 9/11, there was a lack of timely intelligence sharing in both directions, both from a federal level to the individual airports and from an individual airport to the national level. Now, as Teresa mentioned, I came to the FBI more than a year and a half ago, having worked the previous 26 years in a variety of positions at the FBI, almost exclusively in national security matters post 9/11. So that experience with a range of partners inside the law enforcement and intelligence communities, both here in the U.S. and overseas, has helped shape my approach to solidifying TSA's place within the national counterterrorism continuum. Every day, we strive to ensure our operational planning and decision-making process is timely, efficient, and coordinated as possible, and critically, based on intelligence. We work to share critical information with key industry shareholders, many of whom are here today, wherever appropriate, and we're constantly communicating with our frontline officers through shift briefings held several times a day. Thanks to some of these effective partnerships we forged with industry stakeholders, including, of course, with our airline and airport partners, and with law enforcement colleagues at every level, TSA has achieved a number of significant milestones during its first 10 years of service. These include things such as matching 100% of all passengers flying into, out of, and within the United States against government watch lists through the Secure Flight Program, which was previously run by the airlines. It includes screening all cargo transported on passenger planes domestically, and as you know, we work closely with our international partners every day to screen 100% of high-risk inbound cargo on passenger planes. We're also working hard with these same partners to screen 100% of all international inbound cargo on passenger planes by the end of this year. And it also includes improving aviation security through innovative technology that provides advanced baggage screening for explosives. I do want to touch just for a moment on surface transportation also and mention our Viper teams. In the time that we have conducted over 17,000 visible intermodal prevention and response, or Viper operations. We currently have 25 multimodal Viper teams working in transportation sectors across the country to prevent or disrupt potential terrorist planning activities. Additionally, since 2006, TSA has completed more than 190 baseline assessments for security enhancement for transit, which provides a comprehensive assessment for security programs in critical transit systems. Now, we're seeing the benefits of how these steps, combined with our multiple layers of security across the different transportation sectors, which include the opportunities we have for cutting-edge technology, help keep America safe each and every day. Since our stand-up in 2002 in aviation security, we have screened nearly 6 billion passengers. Think about that, 6 billion passengers. Our frontline officers have detected thousands of firearms and countless other prohibited items, and we have prevented those weapons from entering the aircraft. In fact, more than 10 years after 9/11, TSA officers still detect, on average, between 3 and 4 firearms every day in carry-on bags at security checkpoints around the country. The good news is that's down slightly from the 2011 averages. Deploying advanced state-of-the-art technologies continue to factor significantly into our multi-layered approach to transportation security. In particular, we see the efficacy of the advanced imaging technology, or AIT machines, at hundreds of passenger security checkpoints around the United States. And from a security perspective, last year the Office of the Inspector General assessed the manner in which TSA inspects, maintains, and operates backscatter AIT machines. The OIG found that TSA was in compliance with standards regarding radiation exposure limits and safety requirements. As a result of intensive research, analysis, and testing, TSA believes that potential health risks from screening with backscatter X-ray security systems are minuscule. A finding also made by the U.S. Army Public Health Command in a report issued just last month. While there is still no perfect technology, AIT gives our officers the best opportunity to detect both metallic and metallic devices, such as we saw on Christmas Day 2009, including those other types of devices which we are concerned about the terrorists may be constructing as we speak. As manufacturers continue enhancing the detection capability and strengthening the privacy features of their machines, we maintain the ability to upgrade the software used on them to stay ahead of the rapidly shifting threat landscape. And maintaining a high level of adaptability enables us to keep an important technological advantage. Throughout 2011, AIT and other technologies helped our officers detect hundreds of prohibited, dangerous, or illegal items on passengers, not just their carry-on bags, but on passengers. These good catches, as we call them, illustrate how effective our people, processes, and technology are at finding concealed metallic and non-metallic items, either on the person or in their carry-on bag. In an ongoing effort to help educate the traveling public, we highlight many of these good catches every week in blog posts uploaded to tsa.gov. And if you haven't looked at that, I would encourage you to take a look at that. Blogger Bob does a great job in that area. There have been a number of incidents of items concealed in shoes, to items hidden in a hollowed-out book, for example, to ceramic knives, which of course don't show up as metal, to exotic pets strapped to passengers' legs. As strange as some of these tales may be, they are a stark reminder that now, more than 10 years after the events of 9/11, people are still trying to bring deadly weapons and other items onto aircraft. And our officers are detecting numerous weapons every day and keeping all of them off of planes. Now, less than 1 month ago, in fact, over President's Day weekend in February, our officers detected 19 guns in carry-on bags at various checkpoints around the country. In total, 1,306 guns were detected at airport checkpoints in 2011. It's important to note that while working hard to deploy the latest technological advances to secure transportation, we've also made significant steps to strengthen privacy protections for passengers screened with that AIT, the Advanced Imaging Technology. Last fall, we upgraded all of our millimeter wave units nationwide with new privacy protection software called Automatic Threat Recognition. This software upgrade further enhances privacy protections by eliminating passenger-specific images and instead displaying a generic outline of a person. We know that this software also makes the process more efficient. Anytime a new piece of technology strengthens security, provides enhanced privacy protection, and gives greater resource efficiency, I think that's a winning formula for all travelers. Now, as good as they are, these technologies, such as this one, do not stand alone. That's why we continue our efforts to strengthen, wherever possible, standard operating procedures already in place throughout the roughly 450 airports we secure. One of the ways we're doing this is by developing and putting into practice a series of risk-based, intelligence-driven processes to further strengthen aviation security. In 2011, we implemented several new screening concepts, including a program designed to verify the identity of airline pilots and then provide them with expedited screening. And then, for example, adjustments in screening procedures for children 12 and under, and the use of expanded behavior detection techniques. Now, perhaps the most widely known security enhancement we've put in place is Tsa Precheck, one of several risk-based, intelligence-driven measures currently helping us move away from a one-size-fits-all security model and closer to our goal. And that goal is very simple: to provide the most effective security in the most efficient way. One size fits all was necessary after 9/11 and has been effective, but thanks to two key enablers, technology and intelligence, we're able to begin moving toward a risk-based security model. These initiatives are enabling us to focus our resources on those passengers who could pose the greatest risk, including, of course, those on terrorist watch list, while providing expedited screening and perhaps a better travel experience to those we consider lower risk, more trusted travelers. Now, we began implementing this idea last fall, and since then, at the 9 airports we're currently participating, more than 460,000 passengers around the country have experienced expedited physical security screening through Tsa Precheck, and the feedback we've been getting is consistently positive. The success of TSA Precheck has been made possible by the great partnerships with our participating airlines, the airports, and our sister agency, Customs and Border Protection. The airlines work with us to invite eligible passengers to opt into the initiative, and then working with CBP, we're able to extend TSA Precheck benefits to any U.S. citizen who is a member of one of CBP's trusted traveler programs, such as Global Entry. I encourage anyone who is interested to apply for Global Entry. If you get accepted, you get benefits from both CBP and TSA at participating airports. Now, by the end of this year, we expect to be offering passengers in 35 of our busiest airports the expedited physical screening benefits associated with TSA Precheck because we have done pre-screening of them before they get to the airport. Now, by constantly evaluating new ideas and adding strength to layers of security throughout the screening process, we accomplish several things. First of all, this allows our officers to focus their attention on those travelers we believe are more likely to propose a threat to our transportation network. Focusing our efforts in a more precise manner is not only good for strengthening aviation security, but also for improving the overall travel experience for the 1.7, 1.8 million people who fly in the U.S. every day. Later this month, we will begin evaluating additional risk-based, intelligence-driven changes to checkpoint security screening procedures. Now, our ability to find the proverbial needle in the haystack is improved every time we're able to reduce the size of the haystack. Strengthening our aviation security screening procedures with risk-based initiatives such as TSA Precheck is getting this done, and we will continue expanding the program wherever we can. Again, all in partnership with the airlines and the airports and all those who have a vested interest in this process. We'll also continue to explore ways to adjust our standard security screening procedures for certain segments of the general traveling public, as we did last year with younger travelers, those 12 and under. In addition to expanding our use of intelligence, we're also using the risk assessment model that drives the airline industry's known crew member effort in other ways. By the end of this month, we'll expand the TSA Precheck population to include active duty U.S. Armed Forces members with a Common Access Card, or CAC card, traveling out of Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Service members will undergo the standard TSA Secure Flight pre-screening, and if we are able to verify that the service member is in good standing with the Department of Defense by scanning their CAC card at the airport, they will likely receive TSA Precheck screening benefits, such as no longer removing their shoes or light jacket and allowing them to keep their laptop in their briefcase and their 311 compliant liquids in their carry-on bag. We believe U.S. service members are entrusted to protect and defend our nation and its citizens with their lives, and as such, TSA is recognizing that these members pose little risk to aviation security. Now, as we review and evaluate the effectiveness of these possible enhancements, it's possible that additional changes to security screening process may be implemented in the future as we continue to work toward providing all travelers with that most effective security provided in the most efficient way. Of course, we will always retain the ability to incorporate random and unpredictable security measures throughout the airport, and no individual is ever guaranteed expedited screening. We appreciate the ongoing support and cooperation of the aviation industry and the traveling public as we strive to continue strengthening transportation security and improving, whenever possible, the overall travel experience for all Americans. There are also significant economic benefits to strengthening aviation security, most notably in the area of cargo security and our ability to facilitate the secure movement of goods. The interconnectedness and interdependence of the global economy requires that each and every link in the global supply chain be as strong as possible. Whether it's for business or for pleasure, the freedom to travel from place to place is fundamental to our way of life. And to do so securely is a goal to which everyone at TSA is fully committed. Thank you again for inviting me here today. I look forward to taking whatever questions you may have. Thank you.
You mentioned over President's Day alone how many knives were found and guns. What happens to the people found with guns and knives getting onto airplanes, and how many of them have malicious intent?
We believe very few, if any, have malicious intent if you're talking from a terrorist perspective. It depends on the local jurisdiction, whether the individuals are arrested or whether they are cited by the local law enforcement authorities. They are always cited by us for trying to violate the security protocols.
What happened to the puffer machines from the airport checkpoints?
The puffer machines were, just for awareness, are those machines that were constructed in a push to try to find explosive residue on persons, and the idea was simply to have somebody walk into the machine and have a puff of air come on them, and then the explosive detection equipment would detect that. What we found is that we did not have sufficient testing done prior to deployment, and basically some fundamental design features. For example, the air was brought in from the floor to create that puff, and so there's a lot of contaminants on the airport floor that were not in the manufacturer's labs. So a simple design change would have made it much more effective. But the decision was made, and this goes back several years ago, a decision was made to not fully deploy those, and so those were taken, the few that had been deployed were taken out of there and put away.
How do you continuously monitor people who are part of the Precheck and Trusted Traveler program?
So I think it's important to remember that anybody in Precheck or, for example, global entry still goes through physical security. So, for example, somebody asked one time about Major Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter, and if he had intent to do something bad on an airplane. He's still going through physical screening, albeit a different type perhaps, and so those weapons would be detected. We do recurrent vetting against a terrorist screening database every day to ensure that nobody is in that category, obviously. And then we work with the airlines and CBP in terms of additional vetting, which we don't talk about in detail because we don't want terrorists to game the system.
Is everyone who feels nervous while traveling now a suspected terrorist?
Yeah. Absolutely not. I have a daughter who traveled the other day, and she's always nervous traveling because she gets motion sickness, and so we may have to put her on the watch list or something if that's the case. So no, obviously not. But the behavior detection officers are trained in looking at those physical manifestations which may be of concern. And so, given my FBI background, I'm a firm believer in the benefits of that. But clearly, nervousness in and of itself, it may just be simply something like my daughter.
The perceived threats from the terrorists have changed since 9/11, shifting from the idea of using a hijacked plane as a weapon to an idea of a terrorist using explosives might bring down an airliner. Does TSA regularly review its screening procedures to adapt to the new perceived threats?
Yes, we start every day. The senior leadership team, three of whom you see up here on the dais with me, start every day with an intelligence briefing from around the world, so not just U.S. intelligence community, law enforcement community, but worldwide. And probably the best example goes back to October 2010 when we learned about the plot coming out of Yemen of the 2 packages with the toner cartridges packed in them. And so working very closely with the industry and our counterparts overseas, we took a number of steps to shore up security as it relates to cargo, and particularly how we could detect such devices that are well designed, well concealed, and then shipped in a way that makes it difficult to detect. So yes, every day we recalibrate, if you will, looking at what steps do we need to incorporate at the checkpoint for passengers or for our cargo screening, either here or overseas.
Given the increased growth of international trade and movement of people, what do you envision as a good cooperation with foreign countries?
Well, clearly we want to have, from a security standpoint, we want to have security for passengers and cargo that is commensurate with what we have here. So for those of you who have traveled overseas, at some airports, you will remember that you went through perhaps a central checkpoint, and then at the actual gate, before you board the plane, you'll go through another set of security. Well, those are TSA requirements for various reasons, to make sure that every passenger getting on a flight to the U.S. has been thoroughly screened commensurate with TSA standards. Now, there's over 270 of those last points of departure, as we call them, airports around the world that fly directly to the U.S. So our challenge is to work with our partners similar to TSA and then with the industry to make sure that we have, again, the best possible security provided in the most efficient way.
Currently, how much U.S.-bound air cargo is screened on passenger airplanes?
It's difficult to say precisely, but working with industry, we believe in over 80, perhaps 90% of all cargo on U.S.-bound passenger planes is currently being screened. And our goal, as I mentioned, and in working with industry and our, again, regulatory counterparts overseas, is to have 100% of that done by the end of this year through a risk-based model similar to what we're doing on passenger screening.
What constitutes high-risk cargo?
Well, of course, we don't define it because we don't want, again, the terrorists to go to our website and say, okay, this is high risk, so I'm going to do something that is not high risk. But for example, obviously if somebody such as the bombers out of Sana'a, Yemen, a year and a half ago, were shipping computer printers and some clothing and some books from Sana'a to Chicago and paying $500 in shipping costs, just from an advanced cargo information perspective, why would somebody be shipping computer printers, which they could buy in Chicago for much less than the cost of shipping? So any advanced information we have helps go into assessing and defining high-risk cargo, and then working closely with industry, the cargo industry, which has the manifest information of who the shipper is, what the type of shipment is. It really comes down to trying to define and distinguish between known shippers and known shipments versus unknown shippers and unknown shipments.
You talk about mitigating risk rather than eliminating it. How do you balance the intrusiveness and inconvenience of your security decisions against the reduction in real risks?
Well, the bottom line is we have to make sure that everybody who gets on every plane, 29,000 times or so every day in the U.S., that they have been thoroughly screened, so there's not a putative terrorist on there who's wanting to blow up that airline. That being said, what we are doing with this risk-based model is to recognize that the vast majority of people traveling are not terrorists. And so how can we afford them some type of expedited physical screening by doing more pre-screening? And part of that's just shaped on my own background as an FBI agent, where for almost 27 years, anytime I traveled, I flew armed and would never go through security screening. I would go to, the protocol was to go to the exit lane and sign a law enforcement officer book, have my credentials validated, verified, and then get on a plane armed. So clearly prior to 9/11, we differentiated between passengers because we knew or trusted them for whatever reason. So the idea is the same, just to extend that concept to say we already know some about people who shared information or who are willing to share information with us, and we can make some judgments and decisions to, again, expedite their physical screening because we've done more pre-screening on the front end.
How can travelers give informed consent to search procedures when the TSA refuses to describe exactly how searches are to be conducted?
Yeah, it's a challenging situation because obviously we don't want to publish our exact protocols. So again, a innovative, creative terrorist, as we have seen, both with the Yemen cargo plot and an assassination attempt against the Saudi Deputy Minister of the Interior at the time, Mohammed bin Nayef, and then of course with the underwear bomber. We don't want to publish exactly what we do, so they can just look at that and say, okay, we can construct this type of device or conceal it in this type of way. Last summer we saw there was information about those same terrorists who had devised those 3 devices who were looking at ways to beat our advanced imaging technology machines by doing surgically implanted devices, bombs. So they would get a passenger on a plane with a surgically implanted device in hopes that our advanced imaging technology would not pick that up. So that's the balance that we run every day to provide the best possible security while respecting the privacy and the dignity of everybody involved. We recognize that with 1.7, 1.8 million people every day, we don't get it right every time, but it is our goal to provide that best possible security in the most professional way, and that's what we strive for every day. We work toward that, and it's something that we welcome feedback from the traveling public. I hear from travelers on a fairly regular basis, and we work with them to try to address their needs. In December, we initiated something called Tsa Cares, which is a phone number you can call, especially if you are elderly or have medical conditions which may require different types of screening. And what Tsa Cares, this hotline, if you will, if you call in advance, it gives us the opportunity then to work with that particular passenger in a way that we can help expedite their screening process while respecting their privacy, their dignity, and ensuring that there is not a terrorist trying to use that person unwittingly for bad means.
The TSA is sometimes in the headlines for reasons that don't relate to catching terrorists. For example, a mother in Hawaii was denied entry onto a plane for carrying breast pumps. A TSA officer has been accused of inappropriate pat-downs of the elderly. How does bad PR affect the way TSA approaches its mission, and is there a need to respond to the public anger?
Yeah, again, so the challenge is, with those millions of passengers and with 450 airports, it is a challenge to provide 100% total customer satisfaction, and recognizing that many days we don't do that. There are opportunities for us every day to engage the public in ways that most agencies or businesses, for example, I'm trying to think of any businesses that have 100% customer satisfaction with that many customers, if you will, on a daily basis. I'm not aware of any government agencies that have that record. There may be some businesses out there. So it really comes down to the better informed the passenger can be before they get to the airport by looking at the TSA.gov website. We have a lot of helpful suggestions and tips for how to pack, how to travel, what we look for, and what are prohibited items, what things you can take on, what things you can't, and what can, for example, go in your checked bag. A lot of people, gun owners, know that that if they can take their gun in their checked bag, but there's a protocol for doing that. And depending on where you are, you may need to, well, clearly need to have a permit, but you just need to make sure you're following the protocol so the local police have an awareness of that, and that you declare that weapon and it's packed appropriately. So there's all kinds of subtleties and nuances that the more informed the traveling public can be, I think the better job that we can do in providing that effective security.
Following the rules of what you can and cannot take, why can a passenger take on 10 3-ounce bottles of hair gel onto a plane but not one 12-ounce bottle?
Oh, now we're getting into math. Well, so the context, again, I think most people are aware for the limitation on liquids, aerosols, and gels, the 3.4 ounces of 100 milliliters, goes back to August of 2006 when some group of terrorists in the United Kingdom actually took sports drinks and drilled the bottom out of the sports drinks, drained out the sport aid drink, and then filled it with liquid explosives. And the whole purpose of doing that was when two types of liquid explosives were then combined on the plane, it would cause an explosion. And so, of course, prior to that, we didn't have those limitations. So that's what we're dealing with, that we know that in certain amounts that terrorists can combine those in a way that would potentially cause a catastrophic event on an aircraft. When we look at multiple small items, it becomes an issue of how effective is that, if they are the equivalency of those same larger amounts. But look, there's got to be some point where we look as much, and part of our risk-based model is to look as much as a person as the items that they're carrying. And so part of that means, and that's where behavior detection comes in, that's where the pre-screening comes in, as much as we can do that, because we have a whole list of prohibited items, which some of them make a lot of sense. Some we are revisiting to see whether they do make sense as we further deploy this risk-based security model. So there's again, a lot of challenges and opportunities in that regard.
How do you justify the TSA having more than 65,000 employees, more than the Department of State, more than the Department of Energy, more than the Department of Labor and Education combined, in this day and age of calling for less government and less government infringement on our lives?
Well, the bottom line is it's a huge job to provide that transportation security, not only at the 450 airports, but then to work with our state and local partners in mass transit, rails, over-the-road buses, metro systems. You know, there's multiple times millions more people traveling on subways and trains and buses every day than in planes, and that's not TSA's primary responsibility. We act as a force multiplier for those mass transit and other carriers, but that was part of the enabling legislation that Congress passed, is to say, you need to be responsible for all modes of transportation security, so how do we do that? And what we do, just for example, in terms of the efficiencies, yes, we have tens of thousands of employees. 24% of those are veterans, people, men and women who've served honorably in the armed forces. Over 14,000 of our security screeners, the transportation security officers at airports, are part-time, because for those of you who travel regularly, you know that in the early morning there's a rush hour, the morning bank they call it, and in the afternoon there's a afternoon rush hour. So rather than having people on full-time status throughout the course of the day, from an efficiency model, we have the number of part-time people in the morning at the largest airports, and then same thing in the afternoon. So we try to find the exact staffing allocation model that makes sense to, again, provide the most effective security in the most efficient way.
If you were fully granted your wish list, how much bigger would your budget be, and how would you allocate the extra money?
Okay, so I testified last week before a House Appropriations Committee where we're asking $200 million, approximately less than we did last year, so that's my official statement, which I'll stick with. No, look, obviously, I think we are well-sized right now. I think there are some, obviously, additional things that we could do if the administration, Congress, wished us to do that, particularly in surface transportation or internationally, especially on the cargo side. But I can also see the possibility of some efficiencies and savings through this risk-based security model. So in the out years, we'll be interested in seeing what the metrics are from all this to see whether we might be able to achieve some efficiencies.
Is there still a place for air marshals, and are they a good use of taxpayer dollars?
Well, yeah, I'm a firm proponent of the federal air marshals. Obviously, they provide, I believe, that extra layer of security that in the case that individual who has not come up on anybody's radar, whether it's that homegrown violent extremist that we have seen over the last several years, particularly in FBI sting operations, if somebody has ill intent toward an aircraft and somebody is able to go online and look at the anarchist cookbook or whatever it may be to actually construct a device perhaps similar to what we saw on Christmas Day 2009, a non-metallic bomb that could bring down an aircraft. And again, that person is here in the States and has not been detected by anybody, whether it's the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the state and local police, see something, say something, nobody's come up on anything, and that person is able to get through, let's say, a walk-through metal detector because he or she has no metal on them, and gets on a plane, then the federal air marshals are there as that last line of defense for the U.S. government. And so I see them as a valuable aspect of our multiple layers of security. And even if they're not air marshals on a particular flight, and we assign them on a risk-based model also, there is a deterrent effect, I believe, because we know terrorists are aware that we have federal air marshals here in the U.S. and that they see that as a deterrent. And we're also fortunate to have a number of pilots who are also armed under our Federal Flight Deck Officer program. And so even if there's not a federal air marshal on board, it is possible that there'd be an armed pilot on board that if they tried to get into the cockpit, the pilot would also have that opportunity to defeat that terrorist.
Do you think that the See Something, Say Something campaign is working?
You know, I think it's a lot of common sense. I think it's something that we saw with the Times Square bomber, where the vendor You know, he saw something suspicious and reported it. And I think that's just incumbent upon all of us as Americans to say, yeah, if there's something that seems out of whack and I've got concerns about this person or this event as much, then it just makes sense to let the authorities look into it and resolve those concerns. As far as identifying particular terrorists, I know from my FBI experience that a number of investigations were initiated based on that same principle. We didn't call it see something, say something, but it's basically, yeah, there's somebody who's doing something suspicious, and I'm concerned that they may be planning something that's not good. And so there's clearly value in the public being aware of what's going on around and then reporting suspicious activity.
Does TSA have any procedures in place for preventing and responding to the possible release of a slow-acting biological weapon on an airplane?
There are a number of protocols that have been practiced and gamed out, if you will, which I won't go into detail, but the short answer is yes, and depending on what the type of toxic or poison may be, with different levels of effectiveness. So the short answer is yes.
Most people think of TSA as an airline passenger screener. Can you tell us more about the Viper teams and some of their recent successes?
Yeah, again, the whole idea of Viper teams is based on the premise that terrorists are deterred by two or three primary things. One is armed law enforcement, two are canine teams, and three are CCTV, the closed-circuit television. Now, we know from the London attacks on July 7th of '05 and the attempted attacks 2 weeks later on July 21st that if they are suicide bombers, then the CCTV is not effective, because we saw some of the 7/7 bombers in London, before they went into the London tube, actually look up at CCTV as if to say, you know what, in 10 minutes I'm going to be dead and as many people along with me as I can kill. And so it's basically a testimonial to that person's suicide mission. But for those who want to do something in terms of leaving a bomb on or trying to get off or something like that, we know that CCTV can be effective, but armed officers and canines are good deterrents. And so the whole purpose of the Viper teams, the Visible Intermodal Protection Response teams, are to try to throw off the terrorists who may be doing pre-operational surveillance, let's say at Union Station or at an airport, and they go, let's say, Tuesday at 10 a.m. and don't see anybody there, so in terms of law enforcement presence, and so they say, okay, next Tuesday we'll try it again. Next Tuesday they do it, no law enforcement present. The third Tuesday at 10 o'clock is when they're planning to do it, and on that Tuesday at 10 o'clock, there's a Viper team, which is armed law enforcement with canines, includes some security inspectors, TSA, but it's always involving the local police authority. Again, it's designed to simply be visible, deterrent to any putative terrorists.
What is being done by the TSA to be more open about how to manage the no-fly list? And how can it be refined so its implementation manages security and better catches real threats without being subject to persistent charges that it violates civil liberties?
So the no-fly list is obviously based on intelligence that has been provided to some other component of the U.S. Government or to our foreign counterparts who then provide that to the U.S. government. So if you are on a no-fly list, there is information about you that you are a potential threat to particularly aviation, and so that's a reason for denying you the privilege of flying. That being said, there are others who are not in that status, but who would receive additional scrutiny because of, again, the derogatory information about them, all related to terrorism. So only people that there's some derogatory information about from some credible source are on the list. The lack of transparency gets to the point of revealing what that derogatory information is, which in some instances, you've heard the old adage that the government needs to protect sources and methods of collection of that information. In some instances, that is the case, that to provide what that intelligence is in any type of public forum or even to the individual who may be using that as a, quote, fishing expedition to find out what the government knows about him or her, would be seen as detrimental to the national security. So that's the background on it, and that's the reason that we, again, have these intelligence briefings every day. We look at the next several days in terms of who are no-fly individuals who are wanting to fly, and then who are known as selectees who would receive additional scrutiny that are also planning to fly, to see if there's any patterns or any groupings of people that we should be more particularly focused on from a risk-based, intelligence-driven process.
Over 500 screeners have been arrested for stealing from passengers' bags. Do you see this as a security flaw? Because if someone can take valuables out of a passenger bag, could they not be bribed to put dangerous items in them?
Yeah, I'm not sure where the 500 number comes from. There have been a number of obviously both TSA employees and other folks, other agencies, airline employees, arrested for theft, and it is has been a problem. It is also a security concern, and that's why we use CCTV extensively, particularly in the check bag area, to also ensure, both for the protection of the security officers who may be accused of stealing something, but also to deter theft in those instances. And we've been able to rebut allegations on a not irregular basis from those allegations by just going through the CCTV and showing exactly what the security officer did with the check bag. And then those instances where we do have credible information, we have taken steps with the Inspector General and the U.S. Attorney's Office, wherever that is, to have those individuals not only fired but criminally prosecuted.
What are your reasons for favoring using government security officers at airports over John Micah's privatization proposals?
Well, of course, we had the private security regimen set up prior to 9/11, and I think TSA was created for the core purpose of preventing another 9/11. And so, philosophically, at its core, I see TSA as a U.S. government run organization with a counterterrorism focus. And there are benefits of doing that have been discussed. What has also been one of the issues for me is just from a cost perspective, that up until this point, to have the privatized airports has cost more for the U.S. taxpayers, because taxpayers are still paying the cost of the privatized screening. The privatized screeners still have to follow the same standard operating procedures, the same protocols that we use at every other airport. And I think that's one of the reasons that we just haven't seen that many airports actually apply. We have 16 currently being run as privatized screening workforces, San Francisco being the largest. We've had 2 new airports apply since the FAA authorization bill, which included a change in the way we treat applications. And so we'll look at those closely and work closely with the Congress to see how we can best implement the congressional intent behind this new legislation.
Do you worry that urging the public to report suspicious behavior on metro announcements, highway signs, billboards, and basically everywhere can cause paranoia?
I'm not worried about that. If somebody is predisposed to that, then that may feed that. But no, I think it's just, again, it's just common sense that if people are aware that there is some action that can be taken, now the other side of that, every once in a while, FBI and other agencies will get what we know are called poison pen letters or emails, where somebody is wanting to besmirch somebody else's reputation, and so they'll say, well, this person is going to try to get on this aircraft and they're actually a terrorist. Well, we look into it and you find out pretty quickly that that's not the case, and so the person who made that allegation is usually charged with a criminal offense in that regard. But no, I think it's just common sense and saying let's all work together, as opposed to it's just the government's responsibility to do this. Look, it's all of our responsibility. Is the way I look at it, that we each share a common goal of providing most effective security transportation. We want to get from here to there safely, to go see our loved ones, go take care of our business. So let's just do that in a collaborative fashion, and that's what I think works best.
What work is the TSA doing with highway transportation, and what is their accomplishments?
We work closely with the over-the-road buses, which, again, carry millions of people every day. We also work with the commercial truck drivers, particularly those who have a hazardous materials endorsement, because of concern over what a terrorist may do with a hazardous material load. And so we work with them to strengthen their security protocols. Where we have grant funding available, we also try to address the highest vulnerability areas using a risk assessment model. And again, whether it's providing training, whether it's providing resources in terms of equipment, screening equipment, or whatever it may be. And then we have some regulatory authority for who is actually working, for example, as commercial drivers. And we work closely with the industry to make sure that their workers have been vetted, for example, against the terrorist screening database.
We're almost out of time, but before I ask the last questions, I have a couple of housekeeping matters to take care of. First of all, I'd like to remind you all of some upcoming luncheon speakers. On March the 14th, we have former Representatives Patrick Kennedy and Jim Ramstad to talk about the Mental Health Parity Act. Dr. Deepak Chopra, founder of the Chopra Foundation, will be speaking. And on April 5th, Douglas Schulman, the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. Second, I would like to present our guest with the traditional Press Club mug.
All right.
It holds more than 3 ounces of liquid, so you probably can't carry it on.
Maybe the cupcake, huh?
And the last question, have you ever had to be submitted to a pat-down when going through airport security?
Multiple times. So I go through security every time. On one of my recent international trips, I was transiting through a well-known Western European hub and went through the walk-through metal detector, and I knew I had no metal on me, and yet the alarm went off. So I said, "Over here, sir," and they didn't know who I was, and I received a thorough pat-down. I complimented the security officer on the thoroughness of his pat-down and made me stand up straight. So it was, I do.
How about a round of applause for our speaker today? Thank you all for coming. I'd also like to thank the National Press Club staff, including its Journalism Institute and the Broadcast Center, for organizing today's event. Finally, here's a reminder that you can find more information about the National Press Club on our website. Also, if you'd like to get a copy of today's program, please check out our website, www.press.org. And I want to thank you all very much for attending. We're adjourned.
Reese wants a photo of us changing the mug here, so.